Hey, welcome to Film Fanatics. 4 this week. Film geeks discussing movies both new and old. My name is Dan.
My name is Justin.
And I'm Joe, and our special guest today is Peter.
Hey, everybody.
Welcome to the show once again, Peter. We had you for the, Best of Summer, right?
Yeah, Best
last
of
year.
Yeah.
So welcome back to the show. Happy to have you on board for a full episode here. And this week with our special guest critic, Peter, we're going to tackle Pixar's Inside Out, the Brian Wilson bio Love and Mercy, Sundance favorite Dope, and Oscar nominee Inherent Vice. In our triple feature of older films, we've got new classic Man of Steel, old classic Blade Runner, and we start the B section of our Oscar A to Z with Peter's all-time favorite film, Babe. So we'll have all that for you, but first up, we kick it off with a huge opening weekend for Inside Out, setting a couple of records of its own, 90 million take, and Justin's going to tell us about Inside Out.
Meet Joy, played by Amy Poehler, Sadness, played by Phyllis Smith, Fear, played by Bill Hader, Disgust, played by Mindy Kaling, and Anger, played by Louis Black. The 5 emotions that make up the personality of Riley, played by Caitlin Diaz, a 12-year-old girl heading out to the big city of San Francisco. Though after a conflict between Joy and Sadness accidentally leaves them both far from their home, they must find a way to make their way back before Riley becomes emotionally numb. It was a lonely year without Pixar in 2014, but rest assured, it was time well spent because Pixar has come right out the gate swinging with one of their bravest entries yet. I thought this was a really bold concept when I first heard about it. In actual practice, I think it's absolutely brilliant. It's finding ways to tackle very complicated themes, sort of like Up, but also making them very accessible to kids, which I thought was beautiful. But what helps it work is the fact that there is quirky humor, and it's accessible, but it also isn't afraid to go into darker places, exploring sadder themes, emotional, no pun intended, components, and showing kids that it's okay to have these things happen to you, because it's a part of life, which I think is a beautiful message for a family film. Now, I do think there are a couple issues with this film as well. I think Act 2 gets a little rough because they're trying to get a little more experimental. They throw in a couple extra characters just because they can. And I also feel like it places a little too much of the secondary characters front and center to have them try and lead the show, and they just don't have nearly enough to do. But this ultimately comes back full circle for a really, really great finale that ties it all together perfectly. It's hands down one of Pixar's best. I leave Inside Out with an A.
Joe?
You know, I really can't follow up too much more that Justin didn't already say. I wasn't exactly sure what to think about this one, but I definitely think that it is bold. It's definitely tackling something very new and different. It's certainly one of the most original films Pixar's ever done, and delivering pretty much all we expect. Like you said, Justin, heartfelt stuff, complex emotions, but accessible to kids, but easily appreciated by adults as well. I mean, for this movie, you've got stuff that'll make you laugh, make you cry. You'll relate to a lot of situations. It's kind of interesting, but for me, surprisingly, as interesting as the internal stuff was, I actually liked the portrayal of the girl. I felt that she was very real. I felt their situation was very, very real, very believable, and simple. And I do agree, I kind of wish they had balanced out the side characters, which would be disgust, fear, and anger leading things, because they were really interesting characters too, and they certainly were important. I knew they were trying to focus on the emotions of joy and sadness and how they work together, but all emotions work together, and I feel like the sense of unity was kind of lost a little bit there.
You can give them more to do.
You could.
Just the way they were handling it was kind of clunky in a way. It didn't make it unbearable. It was just odd.
Yeah, it didn't quite flow quite as perfectly in the middle there, I do agree, but I still thought it was excellent. I mean, the only real issue I thought that somebody brought up was that, I think I heard someone mention that in terms of stakes, this one's probably the lowest for Pixar, which I guess if you take it outside of context, that is true, so you're thinking, it might not be the most exciting, but it still delivers, I think, on most of the emotional points. I'll leave it with an A as well. And I will say, of all the Pixar movies that I've seen recently, I feel like I really would like to see a sequel to this one. I'd like to see them explore these characters more and this girl's life more.
As she gets older.
I want to come back, maybe explore adolescence. I could see this being a continuous thing.
Peter, let's hear from you.
Yeah, I think it was easily the best Pixar since Toy Story 3.
Ooh.
Yeah.
It may not be particularly tough competition, but I think it's one of the best films of the year. Very colorful, very beautiful world. It had a lot of interesting characters. I would disagree, and I think that the character introduced about halfway through the movie. The imaginary friend is one of the more crucial elements of the story. It's sort of been overlooked in a lot of the discussions about the movie, particularly with the themes and the ending of the film and how everything ties together. I would say I leave it with an A as we've seen so far.
Well, yeah, I mean, Pixar definitely has this uncanny knack of creating entire worlds and giving us so much of them to fully immerse in. I mean, we saw it in the Monsters series, obviously Finding Nemo, Toy Story, all of them, really. The concept is not super original. You guys might be a little young for this, but I'm sure you've probably heard of the show Herman's Head at some point. It was a sitcom that aired after The Simpsons for 3 seasons in the early 90s. It is the basic concept of this film, focusing, instead of emotions, more on the ego, the id, and the superego. But same concept, but obviously here Pixar gives it a whole new world. So I can't say the base concept is that original, but they take the ball and run with it 100-fold. And it also understands its world very well. Like most Pixar movies, children and adults will enjoy this on different levels and for different reasons, especially if they have children of their own, I think. There's a nearly endless supply here of lessons and observations. Peter, I can't agree with you more. I think Bing Bong is a crucial part of this movie, and possibly one of the more emotional characters here. Also, I think the balance between the three, fear, anger, and disgust, and the other two sort of off on their own, I thought that was actually balanced pretty well. We maybe could have used some more inside the head with the three, but I actually thought it was balanced pretty well. I don't know if the comedy always works in this film, but I think that's because Inside Out does not go for the easy joke or the pun. I think a lot of it is either more subtle or just simply more dramatic. I give Inside Out, like about half of the Pixar films, an A+. It's great. It's fantastic. Did you guys not really care for the Bing Bong character?
No. Make no mistake. When I'm referring to secondary characters, I'm talking about like the supporting cast of
the brain workers
who are like making puns. The triple dead gum thing I thought was a good running gag.
that was good.
But what's interesting about that is that it is all part of the Pixar universe that they create. Because we've talked about this when we talked about Wreck-It Ralph. Like, Justin, you didn't see enough of the Wreck-It Ralph world. Pixar really immerses every little aspect of this world that they can squeeze into the movie. And that's why these characters don't really bother me, because I think it adds to the color of the world.
Well, they're trying to show a cartoon version of your brain.
Mm-hmm.
They can afford a few side characters, I think.
It's true.
And making it accessible.
Yeah.
Without overwhelming a young viewer.
Well, that raises a question for me, is maybe who is this film directed at? I can't imagine that an 11-year-old, even going through the same stuff, is going to appreciate it the same way that an adult would. Is this maybe directed more at adult audiences, in a way that Toy Story 3 somewhat was?
I would say about half of the Pixar movies are. I think WALL-E is definitely more for an adult audience than for a kid audience.
Yeah, and
in many respects, Up is as well. If you take the dog out of Up, it's a very adult movie.
Yeah, it's a Ratatouille, which is one of my favorites as
well.
Well.
Yep.
Very much.
Well, I think that a lot of the Pixar films, and I think this one showcases it very well. I mean, I think in a way, I would agree. I think these films are actually aimed at a little bit older of an audience, because the key hook for Pixar, I think from Toy Story 1, has been the idea of growing up and nostalgia. Mm-hmm. I mean, who's going to appreciate the toys more? The kids playing with them now, or the adults looking back and remembering playing with those same toys and their children playing with them, and so on.
Yeah.
So I think that we're seeing another aspect of that, and I hope that I didn't give you the impression, Peter, that I didn't like the Bing Bong character. I agree. It's crucial to the idea of growing up, and there's this pivotal scene that is the saddest thing in the whole movie. And so no, don't worry.
I cried the most at that scene.
I mean, it's really sad, and Pixar does something it rarely does there. And it was pretty intense. So.
Well, look at Monsters University. Even we've discussed this on the show in our top 10s last year, or 2 years ago, I guess. That really is kind of aimed at a college type crowd.
I thought so.
More than the kids.
I don't know. I think it's gotten stronger. Maybe you guys picked up on this, but as the company has grown and they made more sequels to their previous films, I feel like when they do sequels, they do it really more for the people that grew up because they have such big gaps. I mean, between the first Toy Story and then Toy Story 3, it's obviously mostly for the people that watched the first two movies.
Right.
And same thing with Monsters University. Guess what? All the kids that watched it early on, they're probably in college or past it by now.
I agree with you, but at the same time, what I think also separates Pixar from most of the other animation companies working nowadays is they don't want to turn out a sequel because they can. They want these sequels to have some weight to them, which I think really does raise the bar. Monsters University was a prequel, but also explores some of the deeper themes that set the stage for Monsters Inc., and as well as with Toy Story 2 and Toy Story 3 showing how far we've come, but also making it accessible.
Yeah, but this is obviously excluding Cars 2.
I
mean, you can't make that statement without an asterisk.
Can we just go through all without mentioning
Here's my argument for Cars 2. I blame Cars 2 on the fact that they had a project lined up. It didn't quite happen because of Rio, and they had to think of something real quick. Hey, Cars made a lot of money. Everybody loves Mater. Well, let's find a way to make this happen. Was it a complete and utter failure? Yes.
Yeah, but Justin, look at last year. They didn't do a movie. They could have said, let's not do a movie this year. They didn't have to do Cars 2. And you know that's true. Cars 2 is a cash grab only, and the only Pixar movie that is less than an A-.
That's why people don't like it.
I agree.
Because
and
it is
it's
not
far
cash
under that.
However, let's think about Toy Story 2, where they literally scrapped everything and tried to get it out in a year. There's a lot of parallels between the two when you think about it.
But that was also a decade before, and it took a lot longer to make a completely computer animated film.
And I guess they figured they'd play it safe after Bug's Life.
All right, well, we need to move on here, so let's talk about Love and Mercy. Joe?
Well, Love and Mercy is an American biographical film directed by Bill Pohlad about a musician and songwriter, Brian Wilson, of the Beach Boys. The film, deriving its title from the 1988 song by Wilson, is presented in a parallel narrative covering two specific time periods in Wilson's life, the 60s and the 80s. Actors Paul Dano and John Cusack depict the young and middle-aged Wilson, respectively, with Elizabeth Banks as Wilson's second wife, Melinda, and Paul Giamatti as Wilson's psychotherapist, Dr. Eugene Landy, and one of the most vile antagonists I've seen in film in quite some time. Well, I'll open by saying that I really did request that I lead this one from Dan, even though he's typically the music guy, because the Beach Boys is one of my favorite bands. It was one of my introductions to music, so I love everything about them. And just going through this film and just seeing that opening where they went through all their popular hits and getting to see this rather authentic process of how they created some of their best tracks and they entered their experimental stage, and how integral Wilson was to the creative process, I thought was demonstrated very well. And it did a really good job of showing the trauma this man went through, the pressure he suffered, and his issues with anxiety and panic attacks and things like that. And I really thought it was genuine. And the toughest part, though, for me, was which performance was better. And I think Paul Dano as the young Brian Wilson once again scores. He put on a little weight for this one, but once again the guy proves how fantastic an actor he is. But I can say John Cusack actually gives a good performance for the first time, and I can't even remember. So that was great, too. And I thought Elizabeth Banks was great as well. And I thought Giamatti, like I said, always great, does an excellent job playing a vile person, which he doesn't usually do. So there was some diversity there. I did like both storylines pretty much equally. I found both parts of it very interesting, and I was always engaged. The only minor issue I have with the movie was that sometimes it tries a little too much to be artsy. It tries a little too melodramatic at some points. There's some obvious shots, a couple moments that were a little bit on the nose. But for the most part, I thought it was very genuine, very interesting. I loved this movie. I give it an A.
Peter?
Well, I would echo Joe with the performances. I thought that all the principal actors did very well. I think I would give the edge to Cusack simply because it was very unexpected. I've come to expect great things out of Paul Dano. John Cusack is
failing it?
Generally. He's done some good genre work, but not much else. So that was very impressive. I liked how they integrated the music, sort of dealing more with the sort of genesis of the music, doing the studio sessions for Pet Sounds, sort of the underlying music without the finished songs generally, which I thought was different from a music biopic. Did feel the film was a little unfocused at times, meandered a bit, could have maybe used a little more in between the Dano era and the Cusack era, Brian Wilson's wife. It kind of just jumps over some of the issues in there. But I certainly enjoyed the film. I would leave it with a B.
Okay. I do think Dano gives not only the best performance in this film, but easily one of the year's best performances. I thought he was so good in this. I do agree John Cusack is also good, Peter. I don't think he's better than Dano, but it is the best role he's given us in
10 years?
At least. I mean, it's been a long time since, the days of High Fidelity. But honestly, Elizabeth Banks here really, really blew me away. I mean, we know her really solely as a comedic actress, and I'm a fan of her comedy. I thought she was great here, and she really proves that she can do more dramatic roles if she'd like to.
And I want to say, I'm glad you pointed that out. This is my favorite performance from her.
I think it might be mine as well.
I thought she did.
She's so good here.
She did a good job.
It actually made me want to rewatch Walk of Shame and see if I was missing something.
No, well, honestly, watching the movie, I had to do a double take because I didn't realize it was her at first because I'm so used to the accents and the silliness.
She's great in this, and obviously Giamatti, fantastic. It almost doesn't need to be said. But after years of these lackluster music biopics, Jersey Boys, Get On Up, all of these, we finally get one worthy of its subject. The meshing of the two timelines works very well, helps give the audience a fuller picture of this man, obviously, though I do feel like sometimes we spend a little too long at one point, and maybe, they could have balanced that out a little better. I do agree, Peter, that that's an interesting point. We really don't see about 10 to 15 years in the middle there. We sort of get a sense of things. There's certain things referenced in the John Cusack era where they might mention something that happened, but you're right, we don't really see a whole lot of that, which might have been interesting. I also didn't think we got a lot about his childhood either.
No.
There was about a 30-second scene with his dad, maybe a flashback partially, but not much else. But these are all nitpicks. I thought this was a fantastic movie. Joe, I'm with you. I give it an A. Justin?
Well, with the growing number of music biopics being released yearly, I can't really fault filmmakers for trying something different, such as Get On Up telling its story out of chronological order, and this one we have a dual narrative happening back-to-back with Dano and Cusack. But what keeps this effective in that regard is its dedication from the lead actors. I could not agree with you gentlemen more. Dano and Cusack are absolutely fantastic. I would easily say they're likely to be Oscar contenders by year's end. Giamatti, great as well. Banks, I support that statement as well. I think she's probably turned out her best performance here. Hopefully gets a supporting actress nomination.
Oh, wow. Wow, Justin. Can't believe you say that.
I actually wouldn't be surprised.
I can believe it.
Yeah.
What I really do love about this movie that really puts it above and beyond and into much better territory is its use of sound. I loved the way this was mixed. It added a lot of perspective to the characters, foreshadowing things to come, and giving us a really unique insight into these characters. I do agree, Joe, it does get a little heavy-handed at times with some of the imagery and choices of shots. Most of the time, it's not too bad. At the end, it gets a little crazy. But overall, it's a pretty solid music biopic. I give it an A-.
No.
Also, though, with the sound mixing is the vocal performances here. Because Dano is singing a lot of these melodies from the 60s very impressively. I don't think all of them, but certainly a lot of them.
Yeah.
And I do agree that the sound mixing is great here, and also the way it's directed with, like, when we flash back to Dano, a lot of times they use, like, that grainy, Super 8 kind of film that I think really kind of hits it home a little bit.
Giving it that retro quality.
Yeah. It I think helps ease the audience into, okay, we're going back to the Dano years now, before we even see him, we sort of get the vibes.
Do you guys ever think that the handling between the two narratives was a little inconsistent?
Inconsistent how exactly?
Like, there would be these long Dano sections, and then we get to Cusack, and we see his storyline for like 10 minutes, and then we get another big chunk of Dano's.
Dan did mention that.
Yeah.
I could see that being an issue, but for me, I was so engaged every time I went back, I didn't really care how long it took to go back to the other part, because I like both, personally.
It kind of seesawed for me, because there was somewhere I was like really, really invested in the Dano story, and then there would be other times where I was far more invested in the Cusack story, and usually when I was invested one more than the other, they'd be focusing on the other one.
Well, that keeps you interested, I guess, in seeing the next portion, right?
In a way, but it was like...
In a frustrating sort of way.
I would say that one of the other things that sort of not so much bothered me wish that Paul Giamatti had a little more development. He was kind of a one-note villain.
Very
He was a
bad
bit
because of
cartoony.
the-
Yeah.
You're right. That's a good point.
He was a bit
I would have
cartoony.
liked, and I mean, I realize this is mostly from Brian Wilson's point of view and complicated legal stuff, but I wish that we had a little more sense of his character and what he was doing, and
maybe why, I guess.
yeah, is he just doing it for the money and fame, or is there, does he actually think he's
Yeah,
helping?
it's a good point.
Honestly, there was a scene early on where, like a couple scenes, particularly with Giamatti and Banks, where I got the sense that this guy had a very skewed perspective, but in a weird way, he did think he was trying to help.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that was just my interpretation, but there were a few. Most of the time, he seemed kind of cartoony over the top. I do agree, but there were a couple scenes where I thought I felt that he was trying to help, but obviously not the best way.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, let's move on here. And up next, we have Dope. This is an urban high school comedy, and in it, Malcolm, played by Shameik Moore, is a geeky high school senior in a rough part of Inglewood. Him and his two best friends, Jib and Diggy, played by Tony Revolori from Grand Budapest Hotel, and Kiersey Clemens, respectively, are obsessed with 90s hip-hop music and culture, while Malcolm has aspirations of attending Harvard. They run into some drug dealers on the way home from school one day, and the leader, named Dom, played by rapper A$AP Rocky, needs Malcolm to run an errand for him, and Malcolm ends up getting invited to a nightclub. He brings his friends there, and after a crazy shootout, they flee the club, and Malcolm realizes the next day that he has a ton of weed in his school bag and a gun that Dom stashed there before getting arrested at the club. The friends now have to figure out how to get rid of the dope without getting arrested or killed in the process. Zoe Kravitz co-stars. Dope is the kind of beautiful indie that thrives over the big-budget blockbusters of summer, like Chef or Boyhood from last year. Not quite as good as those films, but Dope is tense, funny, and well-acted, while having an engaging story and, as you would expect, a bumpin' soundtrack of mostly 90s hip-hop jams. All three young actors, but specifically Moore, are incredibly talented and bring a realism to each of the characters. Now, unfortunately, about halfway through the movie, the story introduces a little too much into the mix in general. But Dope is a great movie that I think we'll probably be talking about again, at least I will, for the best of summer show. It's an A- for me. Justin?
Well, Dope wears a number of different hats genre-wise throughout the feature, and it's that component that both helps and hurts it. I love the soundtrack. I love the way this is set up in a way that's like Dear White People in a way, but doesn't reduce its characters to caricatures at the start and gives them more to do later. This one, they're pretty consistent throughout. Much like that movie, also quickly escalating into a much darker territory where it's a little less funny, a lot more serious, and ultimately trying to set forth a point about this kind of culture and African American geekdom, as well as possibly even a harsh commentary on the educational system. My other really big issue, other than the big tonal shift, stems from the fact that I feel like it ends 4 times. First time I was kind of okay with the fact that it continued. The second time I thought was perfect. It probably would have been a solid A if they had stopped it there, which was in the final monologue by Moore, which I think puts him above
Yeah, I
and
thought
beyond.
that's where it was going to end as well.
I mean, that was the perfect point to stop, and then they just kept going for like 5-10 more minutes. It's not a bad conclusion. It's just overlong. I leave Dope with a B+.
Joe?
Well, I'm pretty much in agreement with you guys. I think this movie is beautiful to look at. I mean, it's just very well shot and edited, and I really love the soundtrack as well. It feels very genuine, and I do agree. I think that's a good way to put it, Justin. Kind of the rarely spoken of African American geekdom, and how that's reflected in various subcultures is something we don't see a lot in film, and I like that. It was very refreshing. I will admit I think the film does get a little bit messy, especially towards the middle. There's a lot going on, but it certainly never gets boring, and there are some tonal issues, but they didn't generally bother me. I thought the drama and comedy for the most part did work. But the best thing about it was I did feel the characters were very real, and I really enjoyed them, and I wanted to see what was going to happen to them. The ending, there's a lot of mixed feelings about it, because I kind of like the way they ended it. It seemed sort of solid, like, okay, seems like it's going the right direction, but the more I thought about it, I'm like, this is actually more ambiguous, the more you think about it. Like, this doesn't really guarantee anything. There are a couple plot lines here that I think they implied to resolve with that ending. These final shots seem final, but not really. So I think the ending might not have been quite as final as they were implying. But the thing that really carries it for me is that I think Malcolm is honestly one of my favorite characters I've seen in a long time. Like he's really I love this character. He's probably my favorite character all year. I
Wow.
love him. He was just really well written, well acted. I just enjoyed everything about him and his whole journey. So I'm with you, Dan. I leave it with an A-.
Okay. Yeah, no, I don't know this Shamik Moore. I've never seen him, I don't think, in anything.
No, but he was good.
He was great. And I really do like the way his character sort of, I don't even know if you could call it an arc, because he himself
He's good.
pretty much stays the same.
Well,
more or
everything
less.
around him kind of changes,
Well,
and situationally.
I don't know. I think that it's more about his struggle, because the thing that's really ironic about it is that it is a series of crazy incidents. But the thing about it is there's an element of it that does seem like it could be something that actually does happen.
Mm-hmm.
And you have this kid who really is trying to
Do good.
aspire to be everything that his environment almost is forcing him to be. But due to this circumstance, he's slowly becoming everything that he doesn't want to be.
Right.
And he's trying hard to hold on to who he is. So it is an arc in a way. But it's just kind of fighting against your environment and trying to not let it affect you. But it still does to some extent.
Well, and I guess it's an arc of, like, what he already kind of knew about himself,
Well-
making that more concrete. Like you say, he's sort of turning into everything he never wanted to be,
Well, because
and he
is.
hates it.
And he finds a way to roll with it, because
Right.
basically he sort of becomes a
Out
drug...
of necessity.
Yeah, after necessity.
Yeah.
Like his environment says, hey, get involved in the drug business. He doesn't want to.
Mm-hmm.
He does become involved in the drug business, but in his own way, because
Right.
he kind of has to get out of it.
Sort of posing a nature versus nurture question.
Yeah, basically.
Possibly.
Yeah, definitely. I thought it looked beautiful. Didn't you guys think it was just well shot?
Yeah, it was very well shot.
Well
I
edited?
thought some
I
of the techie videos and things to try and make it modernized was a little much, but I mean,
Well, it takes place now.
it does, but it's also like, okay, we get it, social media, we saw this all in Unfriended.
To be honest, I do feel like, though, if they had taken a few things out, it could have easily taken
Sorry.
place in, like, 93 or something. Unfriended.
Yeah, so it was,
You know what?
We've seen so many social commentary movies in the last 4 or 5 months. I just thought it was funny that
Well,
Unfriended was
you know,
the one you
it's
mentioned.
a big part of
Because
our
it's like the one
society.
that was
actually,
so
like-
it's got to come up in film sometimes,
Yes,
guys. It's okay.
that's fine.
Hey, Chef was one of the best of it, though.
Yeah, I mean, Chef really had a strong social media component to it,
Definitely.
certainly. But I see where you're going with that, though, Justin. I mean, you know, especially sort of the monologue at the end. There was like different video shots and
Actually,
all of that.
I do have to ask you, because the thing about it, this movie was so close to perfect for me, but there were just some things that I'm iffy on. I have to ask you guys, what did you think about, like, sort of the main big villain, like the guy that he meets to go meet with for his college? That sort of little twist, that character.
Oh, I hated him.
I thought he was like the most cartoony
Yeah,
thing.
he
like,
was. He was
like-
just the way he spoke was very like.
Are you supposed to be like the secret big bad guy? Like,
Yeah.
I wouldn't believe that.
No.
I just like I didn't understand. Those scenes seemed so. I mean, they were funny, but
Mm-hmm.
so out of nowhere. Like that guy was the most ridiculous. Like I felt like it was watching the Matrix sequels, and he was the architect. I felt like it was he was just speaking in the riddles, and I was, what is this? Is this English?
No, Peter did not get to see Dope, so we're going to go to him first for the home media moment, and that is Inherent Vice, one of the few big Oscar nominees we did not get to tackle last year. It was very limited release, unfortunately. So,
Good luck,
Peter,
Peter.
let's hear about Inherent Vice.
Inherent Vice was a 2014 release from director Paul Thomas Anderson, who also adapted the screenplay from Thomas Pynchon's novel. It was nominated for the adapted screenplay Oscar and costume design, but did not win either.
Ah,
The film follows Joaquin Phoenix playing a sort of stoner detective known as Doc. Various encounters with denizens of the Los Angeles area circa 1970. Perhaps most notably Josh Brolin's Detective Bigfoot, who sort of acts as an antagonist in the traditional film noir, but it's a very large cast of well-known actors, including Owen Wilson, Eric Roberts, Michael Kenneth Williams, Maya Rudolph, and even Martin Short in what I thought was the most memorable cameo in the film.
And Reese Witherspoon.
Lest
And
we
Reese
forget.
Witherspoon, yes. There
Never forget.
are a lot of people in this movie that show up for one scene and then disappear.
You never see him again.
The plot is, I don't think, is really worth trying to
Explain.
untangle. We could probably spend 3 hours trying to figure out what's going on. There's a group called the Golden Fang involved, which are said to be drug smugglers, but might also be a cult or dentists or some
variation
thing.
between the three.
It's a strange film. It's one that I feel like I need to see again. I've attempted to watch it twice, and I really feel like I need to sit down and give it my full attention.
It's a long one.
It's long. It's very dense yet meandering. It's probably the most difficult Paul Thomas Anderson film yet. I would say I would give it a B-, that could easily change next time I see it, and maybe I'm able to disentangle what he's trying to accomplish and what exactly is going on.
Okay. All right, well, let's bring it the other way. Joe, let's hear about Inherent Vice.
Me next. Peter, I really can't follow up that much. Well, I'm glad that you said I definitely, while I was watching this, I just had to check Rotten Tomatoes, as I often do. And I was found, this is one of those ones that's just split right down the middle. Apparently this one had a very conflicting viewpoint from different audiences. And I can understand why. I think it's marketed to a very specific type of viewer. There were definitely things about it that I enjoyed. I mean, luckily I'm the kind of person that as long as a film has a good atmosphere, that's definitely something strong. And this film has a ton of that. It definitely goes for that 70s noir feel, and apparently it's been compared to Big Lebowski a little bit, but I don't think it has as much energy, and I don't think the comedy quite bites as much, but then again, it's kind of different, and I really think you said it best, Peter. It is dense, but meandering at the same time. You get a lot of information, you feel kind of interested in what's happening, but there are literally like 3 or 4 subplots. Like, he's not just solving the one case. He's solving multiple cases, literally, that may or may not be connected. So you kind of get lost. Or even happening. Some of them might be freaking hallucinations. And the performances are sort of, generally everybody just kind of going along playing these interesting, funny characters. And that's really what the film is more about. I think it's going for more of an experience of the time and trying to have some kind of commentary regarding the period, perhaps. Really, it is held up, though, by some excellent performances. And I feel like there is something interesting going on, but there's just too much going on at the same time. I'm with Peter, actually. I leave it with a B-. There's something good here, but I need to watch this one again because I was trying hard to pay attention, and I found myself drifting sometimes. I felt kind of bad because there are elements of it that are interesting, but just something's not...
And you need to pay attention to this movie to know what's happening.
No, if you don't for 5 minutes, you will have to rewatch it because... And it's 2.5 hours long. It's long, too.
Right.
It's long.
Yeah.
All right, Justin?
I got to give Paul Thomas Anderson credit for being a director that believes in giving each addition to his filmography its own flavor and vision. It keeps him original, but that's not always the best thing about him. Stylistically, I think he absolutely nails it. I love the feel, the 70s look of it. I think the costume nomination was completely warranted, and I think for, I guess, what he was trying to do, performances are pretty good. The problem is the storyline is beyond hard to follow, borderline incoherent at times.
Pretty bad, yeah.
There's a bunch of different characters going on. Some are really interesting and compelling, and you don't see them again. Other times, we have other characters who just randomly show up later, and there's all sorts of different subplots going on that are really, really, really hard to keep up with. It's not that they're bad, it's just pick 3 and run with it.
It's too much.
I know for a fact that Anderson did play with components of the novel. I've been told that the ending is different. I have not read it. But for me, it's just a huge step down from the master that he made prior. I think there's some good things about it, but it's not enough for me to warrant another watch to try and see if it gets any better. I leave Inherent Vice with a C+.
Oh, yeah. I like it.
Well, it's certainly convoluted. I mean, there's way too much going on. Most of it unnecessary. It's far too long. I mean, look, I like a Martin Short cameo more than most people. I love the man, but it added something nice to the movie, but wasn't necessary. I would argue no, along with a lot of the characters in the movie. I will say that the acting is pretty solid all the way around. Joaquin Phoenix gives one of the only performances I've liked in the last 10 years or so from him.
Not even her?
Oh,
You guys like her way more than I do. He's good in her, fine. But,
2 years.
you know...
Less than 2 years.
Whatever. He's fine in her, I guess. That was
Statue.
Scarlett Johansson's movie. Come on. But I thought this, the Catherine Waterston, I don't know her, but she was really good in this. But the way, and I guess this is probably more of a, I don't know if this was more of a script or directing issue, but her voiceover reminded me way too much of Blake Lively and Savages.
Ooh.
And that kind of left a not great taste in my mouth.
Glad you brought it up because I kept asking her to shut up.
Yeah.
I got so tired
it was
of her
too
narration.
much.
It seemed so pretentious to
I
me.
liked her acting, but
Yeah.
the voiceover portion I could have done without. Brolin, obviously, good as always. I do think Anderson's directing is one of the best things here. He really does, Justin, you said it, capture the spirit of everything and the era and all of that. But it's just a ridiculous movie to get through. And I'm glad you brought The Master up because I was sort of thinking, I don't really like The Master. We've talked about that as a new classic. And though I enjoyed watching this more because there was more going on, I wasn't that bored with it. But The Master is a better done film.
It had focus.
It had focus. It was it was a lot more reined in. So unfortunately, I actually grade this one a little bit lower than The Master, even though personally I enjoyed it more. I leave Inherent Vice with a C.
It's rough.
I'm surprised nobody really liked it that much because yes, critically it did okay.
Audiences
in
didn't
the
like it.
early 70s on Rotten Tomatoes, or low 70s, I should say. Yeah, audiences. Well, I think like most movies like this. I mean, did audiences, like Magnolia that much?
I guess
mean,
not.
Anderson is a hard.
He's an acquired
You
taste.
Yeah, I like Anderson, but even this was difficult for me to get into.
Mm-hmm.
Every other film, I still haven't seen The Master, but every other film of his I've seen, I've liked off the bat, whereas this one, I've seen it twice, and I'm still... I
can at least-
enjoy it. I enjoy the actors interacting, but I'm not really sure what this all...
And that's exactly how I feel about it. And that's why I have to grade it lower than The Master, because it is nice to look at, it's well acted, but what is happening in this movie?
Hey, you know what,
no
man?
one knows.
I have to confess that it was so frustrating. I think everybody's kind of on point. There's definitely something you're interested in, but it's not enough to warrant 2.5 hours. And I have to say, this is a problem, okay? This is a problem where we're 20 minutes into the movie, and I had to look up on the synopsis to find out what Joaquin Phoenix's character does, and then I found out 7 minutes later. They don't actually say he's a private detective until half an hour into the movie, and it's a 2.5 hour movie. So he doesn't actually mention that in dialogue.
I guess that's true.
Everything else is in the plot. So I remember thinking, who is this guy? Why is she asking him to do this and get connections? Well, who does he know? Oh, he's a private detective. Nice to tell me that a half an hour in. And I was thinking, wow.
Well, you're already trying to introduce 9 different subplots.
Okay, that explains why people dislike him or the cops know about him. Okay, but you shouldn't be lost a half an hour into the movie finding out what your main character's purpose is. I think it does meander a little bit there.
Yeah.
Like I get the sense of it, but you could at least imply something, like a line like, I've been on this job for years. Something. You have plenty of narration going on anyway. She could
have Waterston
she's
throw it in as
my,
a
my
cliff
lover
note.
man with sideburns, the amazing private detective. She was talking about everything else cryptically anyway. Might as well mention that.
That is true.
Would have been a little less confusing. I feel like what they should have done is they should take. I feel like this. I don't know if the novel. I'm guessing the novel probably made more sense to flesh it out, but I feel like this is a character we could see multiple adventures focusing on each of these cases, and it'd be a lot more interesting because there's enough going on with each case.
Right.
Could have been a whole movie. Like there's the biker gangs. There's the Fang with the ship. You know, there's the whole real estate thing. There's the murder and the kidnapping. The freight. I mean, there's interesting stuff happening, but you don't know what to focus on because half the time they just fill it with quirky characters that are fun to look at and watch, but does it really matter?
Does it amount to anything?
Well, I think maybe when I did a little research on this, from what I understand, so that Anderson was sort of trying to capture the picture of this era. It's right after the Manson murders. It's kind of the end of the 60s. The 70s are here. Things have changed very suddenly and irrevocably, and sort of supposed to embody that in a way that maybe Boogie Nights does as well. I think it was less successful than Boogie Nights. But...
I was going to say, at least Boogie Nights stayed on point.
All right, well, we're going to move into our triple feature of older films. We've got some interesting ones to talk about. First up is our new classic, and that's one that came out 2 summers ago, just a couple of months before we started doing the show, so we never got to really talk about Man of Steel, and Joe's going to tell us about it.
All right. Man of Steel is a 2013 superhero film based on the DC Comics character, you may have heard of him, Superman. It is the first installment of the DC Comics shared universe, though I doubt they planned it at the time. We'll have the upcoming sequel-ish, I guess, to it, Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice, which a lot of people are talking about, which will hopefully get DC on the ground. This was kind of the lynch point for everything. It was directed by Zack Snyder. The film stars Henry Cavill as Superman, Amy Adams as Lois Lane. Also, Michael Shannon is Zod. Diane Lane and Kevin Costner stars the parents. You've got Lawrence Fishburne and a lot of the great people as well, including Russell Crowe. Man of Steel is basically a reboot of the Superman film series that portrays the character's origin, in which he has to contend with the evil General Zod and deal with the struggles of being Superman. The biggest difference with this version in comparison to most other versions is it kind of deviates from the traditional view of Superman on film, which is, let's face it, it's Christopher Reeve. Even in Superman Returns, it literally is continuing that because it was safe. And that is the traditional view of Superman as this uplifting, bright, colorful superhero. Man of Steel decides to, I guess, kind of update it, kind of go off the line of the Dark Knight success, make it a little darker and grittier, and also kind of distance itself a little bit from the Marvel movies, which are mostly bright and colorful, which I think is a good difference. And I think that's really at the core of why some people like and dislike this movie and why it's caused so much controversy, is because there are many interpretations of the character. Some like the traditional view of him on film as being uplifting, and some people think the film's too dark. Personally, I mean, I've read Superman comics. Some of them are dark. You know, it's not like Superman's never gone dark before. I think the film as a whole holds up pretty well. I really think the performances are great. I do like the story. And I think the action is awesome. I think it's some of the best action we get. We actually get to see Superman fight. It is a little fast and frenetic at times, as Zack Snyder is. But so far, I can think of a few films that have delivered on that massive scale. That's enjoyable. And I like the direction of the Man of Steel character. I think Henry Cavill is a great Superman. The only real issues with the film I have are there are some minor pacing issues. I do kind of wish that there have been a little more integral parts, kind of focusing a little bit on the past. I think they kind of jump around a little too much early on. But once it finds its footing, it's great. And maybe it does try a little too much with the product placement was horrible. And the fights in Smallville, like, I mean, it was almost comic. And
What do you mean? IHOP?
IHOP. I mean, I like it because it's kind of hilarious. And I don't know if that was their way of attempting humor, because there is some humor in this movie, but most of it's weak. Like, it's kind of ironic. Maybe it's because Goyer's used to writing the Dark Knight films, and the humor was mostly weak in those as well. You know, if you're going to go dark and gritty, that's fine, but I still felt that the key components of Superman were there. I still felt like there were moments that were uplifting. I still think Superman, when he's flying and he's experiencing it for the first time, that's how Superman should be. He's a human, you know, metaphorically speaking. He's a man. He's also a Superman. I think it's a great movie. It's not perfect. I think I thought it was like the best thing ever when it came out originally. It's got flaws, but if they can focus a little bit on Superman and keep it as a linchpin, it could be a good start for something. So I leave it with an A-.
Okay, Justin?
Unlike Marvel, DC has always struggled in establishing a cinematic universe.
That's not Batman.
That's not Batman, thank you. But Man of Steel acts as a sign of promise for a potential franchise by actually adapting to the modern interpretation. I feel like if we tried to do the Christopher Reeve interpretation in today's era, it just wouldn't make sense. He can't be this infallible being that can only be taken down by a green rock. It's not going to happen. Instead, we have to give our hero flaws. We have to show that there is a human portion to him in some way, shape, or form. Also, give him dilemmas where it may not be entirely possible for him to save the day perfectly, which I think this movie does a very good job with. I know that there was a lot of controversy associated with that after like the first week it came out, but I think it's warranted, and I think it's an incredibly important component to it. I think Cavill does a very good job with that human portion. My big issue is, I agree with you a little bit, Joe, in terms of with the past. The movie kicks off with literally him basically in a catatonic state, experiencing these in flashbacks, and it's like, really? We couldn't find a way to better integrate this?
I guess he shouldn't really be catatonic. That's a good... Well, to be fair, I think in that one particular scene...
Comatose, I guess.
Comatose. Well, to be fair, there was no sunlight. He's weaker without the sun, so that's kind of excusable. I know what you're saying. It's not the most exciting, but I think it kind of works for that particular scene.
But, I mean, the world is still very interesting. I think Cavill does a good job of bring this hero to life. The action's good. I think you're right. It is a little frenetic at times, but it's the right kind of frenetic. It never feels like it's too much. And even though I feel like there's still a long way to go before DC can establish a universe, this is a very good start. I stand on my A-.
I feel like this movie is a little too dark. I felt that the first time I saw it, especially because it came out at a time where Marvel, I mean, obviously Marvel's firmly entrenched, in our culture now, but yeah, even at the time, 2 years ago, we still had a lot of these Marvel movies out there, and all of them sort of had this jokey sort of sense to them. This one does not, nor do any of the Dark Knight movies. It bothered me a little bit more the first time, actually, than it did this time, and I think maybe because I felt Age of Ultron was too jokey, so I feel like Marvel's going now. Now we're just redoing Uncle Bucket.
How do we tone it down?
They're just doing comedy. So I think maybe a better balance could be struck here. But I don't think the darkness upset me as much now as it did, because obviously you can tell a good solid story that can be very dark. There's not a lot of humor here, and in thinking about it the second time I watched it, I can't think of any other superhero movie that has made me cry. And as you know, Kevin Costner does that here.
That's right.
As I don't think we mentioned Costner, but he plays, Superman's or Clark Kent's. He plays Mr. Kent.
Pa Kent, yeah.
Pa Kent, yeah. My biggest problem with the movie still remains, and that is the ridiculously long closing fight scene. It goes on like 20 minutes, and it's ridiculous and annoying, and I can't take it.
Dan, you gotta go big or go home. It's Superman.
Well, I'm about to go home because I can't. Okay? I'm not dealing with it. But no, the performances are great. I think it's a really, really well done take on the origin story. And I think you're right, Justin, that you could never do the Christopher Reeve type Superman story today. And that's something I had not thought of. But it's a great take on the origin story. And actually, I really like Snyder's take on it here. I'm not a huge Zack Snyder fan. Don't like The Watchmen. I never saw the first 300. So this, for me, is a really good Snyder movie. So I give it a B+. Peter?
Well, I've actually seen this movie a few times now. I saw it in theaters twice. I've seen it since. Would echo Dan's complaint. Probably my biggest complaint being the ending fight scene is too long. It is there doesn't seem to be a lot of weight to it. It is simply these two men punching each other, knocking down buildings. I don't feel like it has it's the same problem with Age of Ultron as well.
Actually, yeah.
Yeah, this kind of it doesn't. I don't feel there's a lot of stakes here. There's part of the problem is the CGI that we've kind of reached this point when we're not having two guys in leather punching each other as we might have. But performances are great. There were a lot of... I think that the Lois Lane's escape from the Kryptonian ship is one of the more underappreciated action scenes in the film.
Actually, yeah, that's a good point.
Definitely.
Amy Adams is really good here in the role.
She's good.
Too.
She does well in the action stuff. I think that it kind of got lost in the shuffle, and within the movie, within the big fight scenes, it gets buried a bit. All the supporting cast were good. Lawrence Fishburne does a good Perry White, for instance. I'm very much looking forward to what Zack Snyder does with the future of this. And yeah, I give it a B. And one thing I would say in relation to this is there something very different from the Christopher Reeve, but I think it's more in line with the Fleischer cartoons of the 40s, which were a little darker, especially the ones that were produced after World War II started, when Superman started blowing up Japanese ships. And,
that is a good point, Peter, because that's a common misconception. Is I think that a lot of these superheroes, and ironically, DC, I think, is marketing itself as dark, and certainly the comics can be dark, obviously. But there's something more fun about DC Comics that I feel like people don't quite understand, maybe because they're shying away from it. Ironically, though, those early comics with Batman and Superman were very dark, very violent in the 30s and 40s, back before, people were starting to criticize what kids can read and not. They were pretty dark, so these characters are rooted being much darker than people might suspect Superman was. So it's a legitimate interpretation. Yeah, I mean, I think that they obviously have some darkness, but there has been this interpretation for a long time in pop culture where they were seen as more upbeat.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what people expected of them in a way. I don't know, but we're getting back to the roots, I would argue.
Well, that's good. I mean, it is going to be interesting to see where this takes it.
Well, I hope that DC can actually do well. I legitimately hope so, because one thing that they could possibly offer us is serious, darker stuff. And as much as I love Marvel, they're playing it kind of safe. I'd say maybe they have a balance, but I would like to see a really super fun Marvel movie or a really dark Marvel movie. Don't just kind of play it safe with Iron Man, where it's like it's accessible to everyone. I know that makes sense,
Sure,
but
there's horrible things going on.
like
But
offer a
pun,
certain type of film, like Deadpool, for instance. I know that's not Marvel Studios, but okay, this is a film. Clearly, you got to do it a certain way. Fine, that's this character. He's this way. He doesn't have to be for kids necessarily.
Well, and I think that's something that Warner Brothers is going to have to stand behind.
Yeah.
Because obviously, these summer blockbuster movies, I mean, look at Jurassic World. Jurassic World is, there's dark stuff going on. Dinosaurs are eating people, but it's also a lot of fun. People are joking around. And that's what I think people want to see in the summer. So I think Warner Bros. Is going to have to get behind, okay, we're not going to make as much money as the Avengers make, but we're going to make a better film.
We have to. We can't try to pretend like we're Marvel,
Right.
because nobody's going to buy it.
Right.
Nobody's going to care. Like if we just suddenly turn around and make everything super goofy, you're just trying to pretend to be Marvel. It's going to be really obvious.
Well, I think it may be both their advantages, as with Love and Mercy, the rivalry between the Beach Boys and the Beatles produced a lot of
Good callback.
Yeah,
That was good.
so we may hopefully get that, where if DC is successful in taking a darker route, maybe
We
Marvel
can,
will.
Yeah,
We can
follow
see
suit.
the best of both, because
Yeah.
while there is some actual competition here.
but
Yeah.
but also at the same time, I think DC shouldn't shy away from doing like a Guardians of the Galaxy,
No.
where
No.
it's like
No.
the other ones are have like moments of seriousness, but Guardians is also incredibly playful
No,
at the
I-
exact same time.
I think that DC should do that, but I think they need to establish their primary thing is to be
First,
dark and grim
yeah.
and serious, because I know not everything can be Batman. I know that people have been saying, hey, don't make all your characters Batman. I'm sorry, if we do the Flash or the Green Lantern really goofy, it's not going to quite work. Not off the bat, at least.
Well, the Green Lantern didn't work off that.
Exactly.
A for effort.
Though, to be fair, nobody really cared about that film behind it, obviously,
No.
except for maybe Ryan Reynolds, and I think that's even debatable.
He gave an all right performance. Come on.
Yeah.
He wasn't my least favorite part of the movie.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on here. Justin brought us an old classic for the week, and that was Blade Runner.
Harrison Ford plays Rick Deckard, a former futuristic policeman referred to as a Blade, or Braid if you're Joe, runner, specializing in the termination of bioengineered beings with a minimal lifespan known as replicants. However, when 4 of these replicants escape from their manufacturer, Deckard is brought in to track them down and eliminate them, all the while questioning if these advanced beings are becoming more human than human. There's a lot of different versions of this that have been out over the years. There's the work print, there's the theatrical, which isn't necessarily bad, it's just does a lot of things that people had issues with. Then there's the director's cut, which was kind of forced together. Ridley Scott didn't have a whole lot of creative freedom. And then came the final cut, where fandom really pushed this forward. Ridley Scott had 100% freedom to do this together. They remastered it. I feel like it's the best version of the film. That's why I really wanted to make sure that was the one we chose to review for the show. I think regardless of whatever version the viewers watch, though, this is one that really requires a lot of heavy thought and reflection. The first time I saw Blade Runner, I wasn't really sure how to feel about it. It put a lot of interesting ideas in my head, but I wasn't quite sure how to comprehend them. But then over time, it really sunk in with me, and upon a second, third, and even fourth viewing, I really liked it progressively more and more, getting into these characters, really respecting how much Deckard is quite possibly Harrison Ford's most complicated character. And I feel like the ongoing theories of whether or not Deckard is himself a replicant is fascinating. Frankly, I take the stance that he is, but you could easily make a stance that he isn't, almost the way that of the ending with Inception regarding the top. Hey, sorry, it's probably one of the most heavily fan theories in contemporary cinema, I would argue. I feel like also, in contrast to some of the other cuts, this one is also is much better paced. We get to the action in a more efficient manner. It's never heavily stylized, but it's always interesting, which I really liked. I think it also adds a lot of perspective with these characters. Daryl Hannah's great. I loved Rutger Hauer's finale with Harrison Ford.
Everybody does.
And I always have a different interpretation about the ending through each viewing. I think it's a very deep film, and I think that there's a lot to unpackage even after 4 viewings. I still stand on my A+.
It is one of your favorite movies, right?
It is. I still stand on the fact that it's in my top 20.
You're standing on a lot of things. You're standing on your A+, you're standing on your top 20.
He's basically he's defending a lot, so Dan's going to come in for the kill.
No. I think I'm where you were, though. This is my first time watching this movie. You guys have all seen it, I'm sure, several times. I'm sort of where you were when you first watched it, thinking that there's a lot of really interesting ideas here. I'm not sure what all of it means right now. I want to watch this again and sort of gauge how I feel about it after a second viewing. I can see from a clear mile away why it's so influential and why it's so revered. Was inducted into the National Film Registry not even 10, 12 years after it was released. I mean, that's a pretty quick turnaround for them. So it was interesting to see, for me, having no real background with this movie at all other than knowing it's a big sci-fi classic, Harrison Ford, that was it really, that so many of the sci-fi movies that we've reviewed just on this show in the last year and a half have pulled many things from this film. I mean, Looper, Ex Machina, the list goes on. So for me, it was interesting to see it from that perspective. I can't quite give it an A+ at this point in time because I really need to spend some more time with it. But I leave it for now with an A-. I think Rutger Hauer's fantastic. It's clearly his movie. But I do agree that the ending leaves a lot of sort of theories and questions and
things to digest.
And that's not a bad thing. Look, I don't mind the top. I know Joe wants the top murdered from Inception. I don't mind it. It's fine. And I certainly can see the comparisons to that as well. And also, I'll point out that I can see now why, Justin, you have this big affinity for Ridley Scott, even though he hasn't made a good movie, save Prometheus, in like 20 years. I feel like it's me and Cameron Crowe. Like, I gave Aloha a C-. I know that's too high. You gave The Counselor a C. I don't think you know that's too high, but it is. That movie stinks. But I can see why you have an affinity for Ridley Scott, because obviously in the last 5 years or whatever, viewing a lot of his earlier sci-fi work, I get it. But it's an A- for me right now. Peter?
Well, I'm actually going to start off with my grade and then retroactively explain why I give it an A.
Okay.
But yet I give the Blade Runner as a whole an A+. Because I think all 4-ish versions of the film each have their advantages and disadvantages, and while I firmly believe that Deckard is not a replicant,
I'm with you.
I believe he is human and perhaps
I'm undecided.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
And it does certainly vary from version to version. Ridley Scott is quite firm that he is.
He wasn't originally, though.
No, he wasn't originally, and it's really interesting to see how the film changed over the years. I think even the original version, which often has a worse reputation than I think it deserves, the theatrical cut, it's worth watching even with the sort of shoehorned in voiceovers. It is more traditional noir than the others. It's an incredible film. It is incredibly visually beautiful. It's one that I'm disappointed that they don't release. I did see Final Cut in theaters in 2007.
Oh, that's
really
cool.
I wish they would really re-release it every 5 years or so. It is one that should be experienced on the big screen. It is one of the most influential, not only science fiction films, I think any film of certainly our generation.
Definitely.
And it was part of the great year of sci-fi that was 1982, because it came out within a few weeks of The Thing, E.T., and then The Road Warrior also.
Wow.
Don't forget.
What's not to love?
And Wrath of Khan, should I forget.
82 was a big year for sci-fi.
It was a
Guess so.
great year for science fiction.
So not your favorite version?
No, I would say director's cut.
Any reason why?
I think part of it is that I believe that Deckard is
Not a replicant.
I believe he's human. I do feel like Final Cut goes on maybe a little too long. Yeah, it's hard to say, and I think maybe if you asked me in 6 months, I might change my views on which one's my favorite. So it's
Interesting.
It's a wonderful film. All the versions are worthwhile, and yeah, you should check it out.
Joe?
Yeah, I mean, after following you guys, what more can I really add to the Blade Runner discussion? It's interesting. Blade Runner is one of those movies that I would say a lot of people would expect that I would love, but it's not like one of my favorite movies of all time. I'm definitely more familiar with the director's cut, and I think I prefer that version a little bit more. I think I'm kind of with Peter. One of the ways I like to look at the film is I like Deckard's humanity, and I think it offers a very fresh perspective as to the whole concept of replicants and what they are as human, and I think you kind of need that balance. So that's one reason I think like the director's version as well. I do think, though, the final cut is good. I do agree. I do think it goes on a little bit too long, which is strange. I don't think it's... what is the difference in time between them?
Like 2 minutes or
Yeah,
so.
a couple of minutes.
Just a
only.
couple minutes, but I do think... I even thought in the opening it seemed like it was just a tad slower. It's amazing, but it's definitely one of those things where each film version has something different to offer. And I agree, it does offer a different perspective. I think you could watch them all and find something to enjoy. Still, though, it is an excellently made film. I think it's very well shot. I would actually disagree, Justin. I think that there's a heavy amount of atmosphere. I think there's a lot of stylization. I think Blade Runner is a heavily stylized movie, especially in the sets.
I agree.
Okay, I just thought you said that at some point you felt like some shots weren't that stylized, maybe? A little too gritty? I don't know. But
No, I really do like the cyberpunk neo-noir atmosphere of the film.
I-
I feel like it varies from cut to cut how thorough it is, but I do love the general outlook of this this world that put together. That's why I'm actually really hoping Ridley Scott puts together sequels at some point.
I do think the film looks great. I definitely think it's certainly very well produced in terms of the actual production with it, but there's something about the older versions, I just prefer that grittiness because I like the noir aspect. That's why with the theatrical version, I know that it's kind of shoot in, but I like the narration. I like the way it's kind of bringing the whole concept of neo-noir was pretty much brought about by Blade Runner. It's kind of why noir still exists, and
Makes
primarily
sense.
through science fiction. It's an interesting fusion of those two genres, and we have Blade Runner to thank for that. I leave this version with an A.
So, not your favorite version either.
No, I do say, though, in all versions, though, no matter what, though, I think one thing that Blade Runner that really keeps it up for me, I know this kind of goes without saying, but just the whole improvised monologue with Rutger Hauer, like the ending, that whole last
Was that
section.
improvised?
Some of it was. Tears in the Rain.
Oh, interesting.
It's made up, yeah.
Okay.
And it's just one of the best endings to anything.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's one of the best monologue. His performance is fantastic, and that's why he never really cared about any major role again because he did this.
Yeah.
So it's
Well, and I'd
fantastic.
say, I mean, the monologue gets a lot of attention, but I think the brotherhood moment is very crucial, especially if we view that Deckard is human, that he's showing that replicants can have empathy, and that there is something connecting humans and replicants in a way that that they've been exploring throughout the movie, and kind
Absolutely
of draws attention to it.
And I mean, it could definitely be looked at another way, saying maybe he is a replicant, he's
Yeah.
speaking to him a different way, but it still could have similar concepts
Yeah.
about brotherhood.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
They're communicating on a different level.
you know, the concept of the soul and the
Yeah,
emotion.
Rutger Hauer might not know for certain that he's a replicant.
He might not.
Yeah,
they might not
There's,
know.
Again, layers within layers. And
Sorry,
All
Jeff.
right.
No, I agree.
No, I definitely will watch it again. And what version would you recommend I watch for my second time?
I'd say directors.
That's what I say.
See-
Directors.
see
Yeah,
where
I'd
it
say
goes.
Directors all around. Okay. Fair
Yeah,
enough.
theatrical.
I thought I was going to get 3 different answers.
Yeah, I started with theatrical, but that was before the director's cut even existed.
Okay.
So I watched it in the late 90s. I saw theatrical.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's take it to our final film for the show, and that is the reason Peter has decided to join us today, and that is our first B movie in the Oscar A to Z, and that is Babe. It is a 1995 film nominated for 7 Oscars. It won one of them, which was visual effects. You can see that. But it was also nominated for film editing, art direction, supporting actor, adapted screenplay, best director, and best picture of the year. Peter, let's hear about your all-time favorite
Yes.
movie, Babe.
Well, one of my all.
One of your all-time favorite movies.
I don't know if it's top of the list right now, but I haven't tried to figure that out. So, Babe, 1995 film, directed by Chris Noonan, from the screenplay, which was done by Chris Noonan and George Miller, who did the
from Mad Max. Wow.
Yeah, from the book by Dick King Smith. It's fairly simple on the surface. It is a tale of a pig that is won by a farmer, played by James Cromwell, who is deservedly nominated for his role, who is taken to this farm in the Australian countryside, although it sort of exists in this nebulous space.
Farmland.
The sequel does some very interesting things with location, but Cromwell was not well known. It was a fairly Australian cast, a lot of voice actors of note. Christine, I think it's Cavendish, playing Babe, and Hugo Weaving playing the sheepdog Rex. But it's a simple fable, but for me at least, it has there's a lot of power. I saw it when I was in theater, so I probably would have been about 12. It certainly captured something for me, this idea of sort of overcoming your position in society, the pig that wants to be a sheepdog. The set design is wonderful, and the visual effects are amazing. It actually beat out Apollo 13 for the visual effects Oscars, to tell you sort of what was going on. Yeah, it is one of my favorite films. The ending in particular, to this day, makes me cry anytime I see it. Easily an A+.
All right, Joe?
I have to say my feelings about Babe very different, I guess, because when I saw the film originally, I don't know if I'd say I really disliked it, but I wasn't particularly captivated by it. But then again, when I first saw it, it might have been about 6 or 7, so maybe I had a different interpretation. But coming back and watching it again, I definitely could see there is some greatness here. It is a very simple story that I guess you could set a kid down and they might be interested in it, but this is a movie I honestly think more for adults, or at least sophisticated families gathered together, and you could really... There's just so much subtext here, and the characters are so well developed and so human. They stand out, and it's not overly cartoony. It's a very naturalistic movie, and the simplicity of it works very well, but I feel like it's definitely the strongest in the first half. I kind of feel like once it gets to the point where there is the sheep competition, I personally feel like something gets lost. I don't know exactly what. I just felt like the plight of Babe and what was going to happen to him and the interactions with all the animals on the farm, I really liked that, and I guess I was reminded a lot of Animal Farm, the book and the movie, which I like, without quite as much, I think, socio-political context as that, but some similar ideas. I think when it kind of gets to the point where he leaves the farm, I don't know, I kind of feel like some things are a little underdeveloped with Cromwell's character. Like, I wanted more. And I felt like the movie was just a little short. Like, the story's good, but it is very good, but I just wanted a little more of it. Like, just
it's wound pretty tight.
It is wound pretty tight, and there's some great ideas here, and I just want a little bit more from these characters, and I think it just gets caught off a little too soon. And the ending's fine, but I just wanted a little more from this, especially towards the middle. But for the most part, it's a very well done movie. I definitely can understand why it's one of your favorites. I honestly, when you told me that a while back, I was like, really? That's very interesting. I never heard that, but I can understand it. I don't like it quite that much, but it's still a very good movie. I definitely watch it again, and I really want to rewatch the sequel now, because I remember being a little more interested in that one.
The sequel is very different. It's actually, the sequel's directed by George Miller.
So there's like pigs with cannons, I'm guessing.
Yes.
Oh, very close. Very close.
But Babe is excellent, and I leave it with an A-.
Justin?
It's funny that we reviewed 2 George Miller associated films this season, both great in their own way, but for very, very different reasons. Babe's a really, really underrated underdog story, or underpig, dare we say. But it's really interesting that since the 20 years that I originally saw it back in 1995, it's a really different experience. There's a lot of subtext here, and it doesn't hurt the experience. I think it's extremely accessible to children, and there's also things that adults can take from it and talk about and look at what they may have been trying to get across, or even what this may all mean in a sort of Watership Down kind of way. I do think you're right a little bit, Joe. Some aspects do get a little underdeveloped. I think there are a couple times it tries a little too hard to appeal to kids, particularly with the mouse narrators.
I did want to ask Peter about that. I almost forgot.
It's textbook cute humor, which drives me crazy.
It would be an A for me if not for those mice singing. They annoy me to no end.
Fortunately, they aren't always in every single scene, which I'll give them a couple brownie points for. And most of the time, their sole purpose is to highlight the chapters of which the film is divided. It's an incredibly solid movie. I leave it with an A.
Well, for me, Peter, I had to get over one of my biggest gripes in film history, and that is talking animals where the mouths actually move. I can't take it. It's awful. But I heard that this was one of your favorite movies. I said, well, I respect Peter's opinions greatly. I'm going to go into this with an open mind about the mouths. And it honestly, it was okay. It didn't bother me. It was because the story is so captivating and good.
But Dan, to be fair, I thought they animated the mouse moving pretty well.
They did. I will say that I wish the movement was a little more fluid. Mm-hmm. Obviously, Jim Henson's Creature Shop did it. Love him. But
I was going to say, I think
for the time period, obviously, I think they did probably the best with what they had.
It was mostly practical. There was a little bit of CG. But
so now looking at it, it looks like, okay, they're moving a little too animatronically maybe, but obviously at the time they were working with what they had. Henson's Creature Shop did a great job with the look of the film and the animals. So the reason I got behind it was because the story is so good, Peter. I really, really can appreciate this movie on many levels. And, it's funny, Justin, you mentioned that we are reviewing a couple of George Miller movies here this summer on the show. I think it's ironic that we're reviewing Babe the same week that we're reviewing Inside Out, because I think that there is a lot of subtext here for both children and adults to enjoy on two completely separate levels, like the best Pixar movies. I do agree with what you're saying, Joe. I liked when he was on the farm and hanging out, but I think the sheep competition is one of the best scenes of the movie. The occurrences at that are great. I don't mind the singing mice because they are for the chapter breaks. I mean,
I think you could take them out.
Yeah, you could take them out.
I just think
you can. But at the same time, look, it's a G-rated movie, which it has no business being. But it is regardless, just like Toy Story 3 has no business being G. Because there's a lot of dark things that happen. Mm-hmm. So, classic Hunchback, have Jason Alexander sing a song while everyone's getting murdered below. Here, you have the mice to break up the chapters. I get it. It's fine. It doesn't bother me.
Okay.
I am real close to an A+ on this movie. I'll leave it with an A for now. How do you feel about the singing mice,
please,
Peter?
Defend the singing mice.
I think because I basically grew up with it, because I saw Babe. And it was certainly part of my early teens. It was around. My sisters were younger, and they watched it a lot, and I enjoyed it. And then I saw it in 2004 actually in a theater. One of the sort of artsier theaters did a classic film series and decided to do Babe. And that's sort of when it had a revival in my mind, because I saw that and was able to kind of appreciate the set design more, and kind of like the contraption with the gate and how it opens, and everything feels very George Miller now that I know. now that I'm familiar with his style. And
well, I think that the proof is in the pudding here on this movie and its appeal to multi-generations, because the fact that it was nominated for Best Picture, other than the couple Pixar movies that have been in Beauty and the Beast, how many kids movies are nominated for Best Picture? Not many.
Not many.
And it really, I think, says how this does affect different generations of people, because obviously, as we talked about on the show, the core or the median age or whatever of the Oscar voters mid-60s, and they love this movie, but it really, at its core, is a kids movie with adult themes, I think.
I think one thing that surprised me too, going back to watch this, kind of rediscovering Mad Max recently, and kind of going back and watching those movies, and just realizing what an awesome filmmaker he was in the whole dystopian action genre, what he did to kind of reinvent that. And then to find out, I didn't know until we were watching again, that he was involved in writing Babe and then actually directed the second movie. another two other widely regarded movies that are these kids films about talking animals. Thinking what a diverse director. I mean, really, what talent. I mean, to show that he can skip a beat and just doing something completely different.
Well,
is amazing.
he also did the Happy Feet films.
I'm aware of that.
Which this one is very unhappy with. But
yes, but
people do like the first one.
Unhappy Feet for me. I hate those movies. But,
one
okay.
problem,
I didn't know that, so that's interesting.
Yeah,
that
I did
he
like
had a
the
hand in
first.
that as
Yeah,
well.
he has a very diverse, but once you kind of know you're watching a George Miller movie, you can recognize a lot of the similar themes. There's a lot of environmentalism.
Kind of like a Robert Rodriguez, actually.
Yeah.
More or
Because
less.
he's got his hand in a lot of kids' movies, but obviously is also known for more
And
gritty, violent,
and
R-rated films.
you kind of know you're watching a Robert Rodriguez movie, even when it's Shark Boy and Lava Girl.
And I do want to say, I don't know if Cromwell's really that well known. I mean, I feel
He
like
was after because he did this and then he did LA Confidential.
oh, that makes
it's
sense.
interesting though because Cromwell is a great actor and he's still fairly active today,
Yeah.
and I think this showcases that. But my first experience with him was actually the movie. I guess the big movie he did right after this in '96 would be Star Trek: First Contact.
Yeah.
Where he plays a very important character, Zefram Cochrane.
Mhm.
Totally different than this character.
Yeah.
But what a great actor here, getting his start and going on to a big career, I guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the great thing about LA Confidential is he seems like he's playing a Farmer Hoggett type character, but he's not.
Not quite.
Yeah, I thought he was great in this. All right, well, Peter, thank you again for joining us.
Yeah, glad to be
On
here.
the
Thanks
show.
for having me.
Yeah, and we always have talked about doing a sci-fi type mini-sode with you about, what sci-fi
About 6 months
is,
ago,
so we maybe in sometime later
I would,
this year
yeah, I
we'll
would think
tackle
that this summer sometime I should have time again, but we'll.
Playing around the idea of like maybe top 20 influential sci-fi
Yeah.
films.
Last 20 years.
something along those
Some
lines.
discussion.
Yeah, we've bounced some ideas around, but yeah, we'd love to have
Yeah.
you aboard for any sort of sci-fi
Yeah, I'm
mini-sode
certainly
we do, of
happy to do
course.
that.
And,
I am. It's one of my areas of expertise.
Yeah. I
It
would
is, yes.
say.
And just to let you know, we are possibly going to be doing this at some point in the future. We're thinking about doing a weekly or maybe monthly podcast doing the Boldly Going, where we do Star Trek episodes. If you want to pop in for one of those,
Yeah, I
here and
might be able to. Depends on when and. Yeah.
I just can get it on the air now so that people can be interested in it.
Yeah, I'm interested in it already.
Well,
so-
There we go.
I knew you would be. So
Perfect.
if you want to drop by, you're always welcome.
Yeah.
All right, and of course, Joe's got a ton of videos up on the Merlin channel all the time, doing some specific ones for the summer releases as well as your normal stuff.
I actually wanted to do it a little sooner, but I think if I have some time, I might do an inside-out review just to kind of expand my thoughts, and maybe for Dope as well, because I think that more people need to know about that movie. Cause
Absolutely.
I agree.
I really did enjoy that. And
Yeah.
Peter, please do see it if you have the time.
Yeah, I'm planning to now. I've caught up on the blockbusters. So,
Good. And we have our channel, of course, so if you'd like to subscribe to that, go ahead and do that. And you can join us on Facebook, Film Fanatics with an exclamation point, and the Twitter feed at Film Fanatics Pod. That will do it for the show this week. Thanks so much for listening. Peter, thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you back here next time. Bye!